This is a Glassbox Media Podcast.
Welcome to another exciting episode of The Business of Sound. I'm David Segura, the CEO of Glassbox Media and the host of this podcast. As always, our goal is to give you actionable insights into the world of podcasting that should be relevant whether you're a content creator, podcast executive, or marketer. As always, we welcome you to enjoy the show where we ask, if possible, for you to give us a 5-star rating. It allows the show to be a little bit more discoverable. And also feel free to share and follow us on social media, whether that's Instagram or LinkedIn. We have a special episode for you today that's actually going to be driven by our head of marketing, Nick Kastner. The guest is going to be Lloyd George, an amazing content creator and podcaster who's worked with a lot of amazing brands from DraftKings to GoPuff to Chick-fil-A, personal favorite. So he's done a lot in the community. He's doing a lot for people of color, and I think for creators in general. But the question on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people's mind, is, Nick, why did you decide to bring Lloyd to the podcast?
You know, Lloyd is doing a lot to bring TikTokers into the space of podcasting, and then also coaching podcasters on how to best execute on TikTok. And those conversations we're having with almost all of our creators here at Glassbox. So, you know, I'm really eager to show everyone this conversation.
Amazing. With that, let's get to it.
What does a podcast production company do? Where is the industry headed? These are just a few of the questions that podcast founders and experts are answering in a new show from the Podcast Academy and DCP Entertainment, Podcast 360. Company founders and podcast experts will answer 3 questions about all things podcasting. They'll have just 60 seconds to answer. Join us on Podcast 360 with new episodes every Tuesday. Follow us at DCP Official for show news and updates.
Lloyd, thank you so much for joining today. How are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, same here. You know, this has been on the calendar for a month, and you know, even from when we first met at a podcast movement, like 6 months ago, I was just like, this is a guy we need on Business of Sound. So thank you so much for the time.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, you know, there's so much I want to get to in the next half hour, but I think to start, if you could give a sense of how you got into podcasting. Let's start there. How did you find your way into podcasting?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey in podcasting began in 2015. I was working a job that I absolutely hated. And so to make the time go by faster, I'd listen to podcasts. And so that was the first time I realized, like, oh, this is like a very special medium. I realized at that moment that it's not like I could have been doing my job and watching YouTube. I couldn't have been like watching TV, but it's not quite like music because it's like you're listening to educational content. So it just felt like such a unique thing at that specific time. And so that's when my love with podcasting started. In 2018, 3 years after that, I decided to create my own podcast and transition from being just a consumer to now being a creator. And that in itself literally changed my life. I mean, I started to find opportunities that I otherwise would not have been qualified for, but because I had this podcast, I was getting opportunities. And so that's when my love with podcasting grew even more. But in 2021, I decided that I was going to start encouraging other people to also create their podcasts, just because I had seen so many, I had so many life-changing moments and I wanted other people to experience that. And so during the pandemic, I just decided every single day for the next year, I'm going to post one video on TikTok with a podcast tip. Did that, and it's just been an amazing journey ever since. I mean, I've built a community of about 12,000 people, and it's just been like amazing so far.
Yeah. And, you know, you mentioned TikTok. All of your content is so focused on like kind of the convergence of how video and audio can support one another, and, you know, how YouTube, podcast, TikTok, how all of these things can, you know, develop into a media property. So with this shift towards video, what's your recommendation to audio first creators on how to make that shift?
Yeah, I love video. I'm probably a little biased just because I'm such like a video nerd. And so I'm encouraging like everyone to start using video, and that's not literal, because I think there are a lot of podcasters that are audio only that will never feel the need to have to switch to audio. From the research I've done, the 2 groups of people that I think can remain audio focused or thrive in an audio first environment are podcasters that are true crime creators, for instance, where the addition of video doesn't necessarily enhance the story. If anything, I think it takes away from the story. The second group of people that I think don't need to be video first podcasters are people that already have an established audience. The benefit of video nowadays is that it expands your reach. And so because the discoverability within the world of podcasting is still growing, if you already have an audience, there's probably not that much more to gain by adding a video component.
Yeah, and then what type of creators do need to do video? Like absolutely no questions asked.
Yeah, this is such a great question. I think anyone that is starting a podcast for the first time that is maybe not true crime, I think scratch that. Even if you are true crime and you're starting a podcast for the first time, I think you absolutely need to be on video. I think the way in which that will manifest itself will be different for different genres, but I think everyone should be on video. Part of the reason why is just that if you knew that every time you post a video, an additional 200 to 300 people are going to see that video, that is such an easy way to grow your audience. And so I think for podcasters, that's how we should be thinking about video. Like how think of it as free marketing for now.
Yeah, yes. And I also think the type of true crime show matters a lot. Like, for example, we have a Glassbox and our partners Crawl Space Media just released a series called Dark Valley. And it's, 13 episodes that cut interviews, investigative reporting. The way to capture that on video is really shoot a documentary, like a film. Like it's so nuanced and complex. But then that same team also makes the podcast called Crawl Space, which is sort of an interview based show that highlights different thought leaders around true crime culture, and that they have like 10,000 followers on TikTok just because they repurpose those interviews. It's that the structure of the show is similar to what we're doing now. So yes, couldn't agree more. But I do think almost all creators should be considering video in some capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a friend that does a true crime podcast, and the way in which he does his clips is it's not like he's sharing anything from the actual content of the episode, but he'll make a clip after each episode saying, and he'll basically just tell you the story. So he'll say, imagine you lived in Charlotte in 1962, and then this happens. And by the time you get to the cliffhanger, the video ends and he says, if you want to listen to the whole story, check out the podcast. And it's like crazy conversions from like TikTok to RSS, which is something that, I think that's the big reason people don't want to create video. They just don't think that there's any linkage. But I do see a lot of true crime podcasters able to drive people from social media to their actual RSS feed.
Yes, yeah, and that linkage is definitely something I want to highlight and explore more. Where I was emailing a creator back and forth. His name's Andrew Gold. He hosts the Glassbox show On the Edge, and he recently surpassed like 200,000 YouTube subscribers. It's very video first, and I was asking him about TikTok. Was like, hey, is this still a focus? Because a year ago we were like, hey, you need to get on TikTok. He was the classic, like, oh, I don't want to dance. It's like TikTok is more than dancing. Just download the app, start scrolling, but you should start posting videos. And then of course, like his third video got like 500,000 views, and then he totally got sunk. He got sucked in. But his comment to me yesterday was he didn't see many people going from TikTok to the RSS feed. And I do, as a user of TikTok and podcasts, those are probably my two biggest medias I consume. I do kind of get it that when you're scrolling and you're watching 6-second videos, it's tough to stop that behavior and go listen to an hour-long podcast. What have you seen works the best to convert those TikTok videos to audio downloads?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for the last few weeks, I've been in a very deep tunnel, just trying to understand like what would make someone leave a social platform and go and listen to an entire episode. And so I've just been asking some of my friends. I have one guy who has just a crazy, insane podcast. I've never seen a week go by where he doesn't go viral. And so I've just been asking him like, hey, like, do you see like a spike in your podcast downloads whenever you do go viral? And he was saying yes. And so I was trying to analyze like what are you doing specifically that's like different from everyone else? And part of what I see is a lot of his videos have like cliffhangers. And so they're all stories where it's like, you are not going to get the end of this story unless you listen to the entire podcast. And so as I just sort of analyze my own consuming habits, I think there's times where it's like, hey, if I'm consuming this content and maybe 3 or 4 times, there's like 4 videos that leave me at a cliffhanger that I want to know about. I'm probably going to go subscribe and go to the RSS. And so that's one thing I see. Like podcasts that normally have cliffhangers, I think do have like a higher rate of pushing people through to the RSS. The other thing I'm seeing is podcasts where it's weird because I've been seeing this thing where like people aren't also, they've just accepted that like, hey, the bulk majority of you watching this clip are not going to go listen to the full podcast. Great. Now that I know that, what does that mean for me? And so just thinking through how creators are using that almost as like a reminder tool or a relationship builder tool. And so a great example of this is you, right? It's like I saw your clip yesterday as you interviewed Stephanie from Impact Theory, and it reminded me that like, oh yeah, I do have this saved in like my feed. So when I go drive next time, I am going to play it. And so because you didn't see a direct click from TikTok to the RSS, you may assume that it didn't actually drive, but I did end up listening to it when I was driving. And so I think that like there are instances like that where it's like the correlation may not be like a 1-to-1, but there still may be like added benefits.
Yes, yeah, and even like as the audience develops on TikTok, even if those people aren't listening, it does like increase the value of the media property. You know, like you can eventually sell TikTok brand partnerships, and like it is one channel of many that at Glassbox, and I can see this in your content as well, that it's like it's not just the audio RSS feed, it's like the value of the whole brand and property, and TikTok is the fastest emerging media that is embedded within all of that.
Yeah, absolutely, spot on.
Yeah. So I don't know if this hits your radar, but there's a big announcement that TikTok is rolling out this feature to embed podcasts directly into videos. That only certain creators have access to it now. They're rolling it around, rolling it nationwide and global. But that you could. My understanding of it is like when you see the TikTok clip, you can hit play and then in the TikTok app consume the entire full length episode. That like there's an RSS feed plugin to TikTok directly. What are your thoughts on that rollout, and are you optimistic or pessimistic about the announcement?
Yeah, so I did see it, and I'm optimistic about it, and I think that's like a very big step in the right direction. I am a bit sad that I think when the feature first launches, if a user listens to the entire episode within TikTok, I don't know, number one, if that will count as like an IAB certified download. Therefore, like I don't know if it'll show up on your host. And so I think creators may have to do a little manual work at first, trying to analyze like adding up all their plays. But besides that, I'm very, very excited about this, and I think if it works, this could be a great test study for like other platforms like Meta and Instagram and Threads and X. So I think this is like a very, very strong start. I'm very curious, how do you feel about it?
So like 2 years ago, Facebook rolled out a similar where like you could there was a podcast player within Facebook, and that they ended up like canceling the feature that you can no longer do that. I'm a little skeptical on the whole, like, because when I'm on TikTok, my attention span, I can feel it shortening by the day, it's very quick hit videos. But when I listen to podcasts, there are a lot, like I'm a big fan of, Kara Swisher, an occasional Joe Rogan interview, like long form where I like hearing what this person has to say with no boundaries. So I see a potential disconnect, but as a user, as a champion of both podcasting, I work in the space, and then a fan of TikTok, I hope it works out, but I could see it's struggling because of that.
Yeah, that's a very, very great point. And it's so funny because yesterday I was driving, right? I have like two phones to like capture content. It's a weird setup.
Okay.
But anyway, I was driving, right? And I was listening to like a podcast in one phone and using my GPS. And I was at a light, and then I realized, like, as I was waiting, no, I was picking up my wife. That's what it was. So I was waiting for her to come in the car, and I realized as I was listening to a podcast, I was also on TikTok at the same exact time. And that was maybe the first time I realized that like this is weird, first of all, but I could see a world where the two kind of like coexist at the same time, because I do know lots of people that do that. They'll be like listening to music and scrolling TikTok at the same time.
Yes, yeah, and I mean the one. I don't think we can talk about this without highlighting the recent virality of the really good podcast where the influencer, where she has the deadpan humor, and her first episode was with Drake. The recent one, as of this recording, was with Mark Cuban.
Yeah.
And that has just like overtaken culture, topping the podcast charts. And a lot of it, there's sort of like a black box around the show of like, how is this influencer who did have an established audience booking all these A-listers? But I think, for a pro of why TikTok should do it, or like it should continue, and like why it will be successful, is exactly that. Like the culture around TikTok flooded into this podcast, and it shot the show to the top of the charts.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings up a great point, because I think I'm hearing conversations where some people would argue that in a future world, social clips and video podcasting is more important than RSS content. I don't know that from a value perspective, you could probably monetize a podcast more, but there is a point to be made that like we have no discoverability in podcasting, and maybe that's like an overstatement, and maybe there's like lots of people that are working to solve that. So like I retract that, but I do think that like social media is filling a critical need that I think podcasters want, and so I could see more podcasters going that route and putting video, not only just like making their content video first, but it's almost like musicians, how they'll tease their content on like TikTok and then release the song. So you could argue that like their social content is more prominent than the actual song, because based on how that performs, that'll dictate their actions to release a song. I think podcasting could be the same thing in a few years.
Yeah, yes. And, my wife is a musician. So I think the whole world, but especially the music world, knows how disruptive TikTok was to that space. And so many of these musicians now are pretty much content creators first. And some musicians may cringe at that, but the fact of the matter is like TikTok is very important to this. And, in the audio world, it's tough to say like the social content is more important than the audio content, but I would say that they're both important. Like we don't necessarily have to rank them, but they're both integral in the podcast growth strategy.
I agree.
Yes. Slightly shift the conversation. You have your social content and just content in general. It does an excellent job at championing diversity in the world of podcasting, and empowers creators of color to really enhance, improve, and grow. And that is one thing in podcasting that has really podcasting has really struggled with. That the like classic white dude turns on a microphone was like the podcast meme for years, and is still true to this day. So I first would just love to hear, with that being kind of the focus of your community, what are you hearing from creators, and what can the industry do to better champion that mission as a whole?
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a great question. I think one of the benefits and beauties of like podcasting is the barrier to entry is still so low. And my hope and my prayer is that it continues to stay that way, so that people that traditionally would not be able to create a podcast, maybe because they can't afford a microphone or wherever they may be location wise, if we keep the barrier low, I think that will allow for everyone to take advantage and participate in like this beautiful medium that we're creating. And I think the sooner we're able to recognize that, like, oh my gosh, like in 10 years, podcasting is going to be even bigger than it is now. Wouldn't it be in our best interest to make sure that there's so many different perspectives so that we can all contribute to what it does look like 10 years from now? And so I'm very optimistic, quite frankly, with like the number of creators that I'm seeing create podcasts. Not recently, maybe like 6 months ago, Edison released their Black Listener report, and it was very optimistic just to hear how much more opportunity there is for Black creators to start creating content and start creating podcasts. Also, the rate at which Black people are consuming podcasts is very, very exciting. And so it's exciting and great to see from that perspective. The one thing I will say that does concern me, that I am a bit fearful of, is just from an ownership standpoint. I would love to see more Black-owned hosting companies, more Black-owned analytics companies, more Black-owned microphone companies. As this medium continues to grow, I think it's important that people of color also have a stake in it. And so while I do think that there are like some exciting and some amazing like Black-owned companies like Dystopia, which is a Black-owned hosting company out of Charlotte, I'm hoping to see more of that 3 years from now.
Wow, yeah, I was not familiar with the hosting company you just mentioned, but when you went through each like microphone companies, I picture white guys owning every single one of them. Like
Yeah,
I can't think of a counter example.
same.
So yeah. So wonderful thing to highlight. Thank you for sharing. What is your advice to content creators broadly, but also content creators of color as they are thinking about getting into podcasting and exploring the medium?
Yeah, I think that one thing that I have been seeing as untapped is the power of relationships and connections. And I think there's an awesome quote by a creator named Issa Rae, and she talks about not networking upwards, but networking like across the aisle. And I would love to see more like Black creators do that, just leverage the network effect in podcasting, realizing that if we all collaborate together, that we're all likely to like help each other succeed. And so I think there's a big opportunity there. There's associations like Black Podcast Association, as well as Black Pod Collective, right? These are just large groups of people where Black creators can come together. They can gain resources. They can find out what resources exist for Black creators like myself. It's always shocking to me how many things are out there to help us, but we just may not know about them. And so joining these Black associations just not only give us more collective power, but also just give us access to information that we may not have known existed. And so I think just like starting where you are as like a Black creator and realizing that your voice is needed, like we need your content, in addition to joining these Black owned associations, I think is like a great start.
Yes, and the networking sideways, if you will, I think is good advice for anyone, especially young people as they're starting their career. That it is very tempting to focus on connecting with the CEO, but connecting with the people who will become CEOs as you both grow and advance in your career is so sharp.
That's such a great point. Yeah, you literally just don't know like where everyone's going to be 5 years from now. And so I think like having solid relationships at any point in your life, but especially when you're starting, is so important.
Yeah. Yes. So as someone who has paid attention to podcasting for the past few years and really seen it evolve and culture and establish itself as a medium, where do you predict the industry will head years from now? Do you have any bold predictions or insights?
I do. I love bold predictions, and I understand that a lot of them will probably be wrong, but that is like the beauty of it. I think the first is just that like I think we're underestimating how important video will be in the world of podcasting, and I think that like I hope that video is a great entryway for more outsiders that currently don't listen to podcasts to get into the podcast world. A good example of this is someone like my mom. She consumes a lot of podcasts, but only on YouTube, which is just like that's just a weird thing to me. And so I think in the future we'll have more of that. The second big bold prediction is I think micro communities will become even more important. And so I think historically, maybe 5 years ago, there were these large podcasts that I think kind of span genres, like Joe Rogan, right? Like lots of different types of people, lots of different races, lots of people from different countries, different states. They kind of listen to this one big podcast. It wouldn't surprise me if like 5 years from now, there's like less Joe Rogans or like less podcasts that are the size of Joe Rogan's, but there's lots of smaller micro podcasts that are well known, well liked, well respected in their micro community. And so I think we'll probably see more of that in the future. There's a great podcast episode with Tim Ferriss on a podcast called The Published Press. And he talks about how like the idea of like the celebrity is kind of gone. And so historically, we thought of like there were these mega celebrities like Oprah and so on and so forth. And he kind of makes this prediction that there can't really be an Oprah anymore in today's day and age because we all want to be the Oprah. We're all creating content. And so in the future, we may all be creators with our micro communities. And so that will mean there's like less likely for that there's like one large mega celebrity that spans everyone.
Yeah, I like that. I may actually even repeat that and quote this interview. That is a very good and just insightful. That I think, especially as when TikTok first launched, there were creators every day, blowing up, gaining 1 million followers overnight, and now that's very difficult to do, if not possible overnight. And it makes perfect sense that audio would have that same trend of like there won't be one podcast to dominate them all now that there are so many established people making excellent content.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Lloyd, our last guest was Stephanie Arkelian from Impact Theory, who you mentioned before we hit record that you grabbed lunch with yesterday. So I started this with Stephanie, and I kind of liked the banter and think it gives fun insights to the guests as we're talking about podcasting. But you just mentioned listening to a Tim Ferriss interview. What are some of your favorite go-to podcasts?
Yeah, absolutely. So one I've been listening to lately is called The Published Press by two guys called Colin and Samir. It's a great podcast for content creators or people that want to get into the world of YouTube. Another podcast I've been listening to is called The Manly Deeds podcast, which is a few guys based out of Charlotte. And I don't know, there's just something cool about like new podcasts that are just like, they're growing really fast, but they're also just like figuring out their setup, their synergy. They have a new studio, and so it kind of feels like I'm going on this journey with them. And so that's been another one that's rotating well in my playlist. And I'd say the last one I think that's in rotation is a podcast called The Content Trapper by Anna, who's based in Atlanta, and it's great for content creators and podcasters. She breaks down a lot of information like how you can have a live podcast, like a live podcast event, or how do you build an audience in the world of podcasting? And so it's a great podcast for content creators.
Yeah, and isn't Anna the founder of Black Podcast Collective?
She is. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Amazing. And I think I saw the first episode of that show. I'm gonna have to circle back. We've had a lot of discussion around live events at Glassbox. That's a very exciting sort of new thing now that pandemic is officially over. We can start planning these large gatherings.
Yeah. And can you share? I'd love to hear what yours are. What's on your playlist?
We talk about discoverability in podcasts all the time. I do sort of have the same shows I always go back to. Pivot is one of my favorites. It's hosted by Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. I'm a big news junkie, so I listen to Up First in the Daily every single day. And then I've tried to sort of expand into new shows. Similar to yourself, we're exposed to so many podcasts and, read descriptions, swap trailers, all that stuff. But one I've really loved is Articles of Interest. It's like a fashion history show. That it's produced by Radiotopia. Really fun, really interesting. So that was a recent discovery. Well, it's a show I knew I was aware of for quite some time, but I finally hit play like a week ago, and I've fallen in love.
That's awesome. How it sounds like you don't. How often would you say you try a new show?
Not as much as I'd like. I'll say optimistically once a week, but I bet it's probably less than that. You?
Yeah, same. I think part of it is like sometimes I just feel like I don't have much time, and if I'm gonna listen to something, I can't risk it not being like good. I just need it to like do what I needed to do. But I definitely need to expand. I have a long list of podcasts to check out.
Yeah, yes, of course, Lloyd. Well, where can our listeners connect with you online and continue to engage with your content?
Yeah, absolutely. Funny story. My first name is Lloyd and my last name is George. And so people just kept calling me George. And so I just decided, you know what? I'm going to make all my social handles at Lloyd, not George. And so that's exactly where people can find me. On all platforms, just search Lloyd, not George. I would love to connect and keep in touch. My main platform is Instagram.
Okay, amazing. And before I officially sign off, I am sitting right next to the AC, and I didn't want the AC to be picked up in the microphone, so I shut it off. And I'm about ready to break a sweat because I have no AC in this room. So yes, I am going to. I'm looking forward to closing out and turning the AC back on. But thank you for everyone for listening to that random anecdote and for listening to today's episode of Business of Sound. The show is produced by Erica Miranda and Nick Kastner. We release episodes every other Thursday. Please leave a 5-star review to it helps support the show, especially on Apple. It helps with ranking your show. So I've been texting some friends. I'm probably going to text Lloyd after and be like, hey, can you fast forward or listen to enough of an episode so for the review to count? Follow Glassbox Media on Instagram and LinkedIn. Thank you again so much for listening. We will see you in future episodes.